today I'm going to talk about something that I feel very, very strongly about. And that is an issue that I think many of us struggle with at different levels. And that is that I believe that many of us on different levels live inside of what I call a mental prison. And there are different degrees of extreme when it comes to our mental prison. I'll explain what I mean, and then I'll talk about some of the poisonous habits that we have that actually keep us in our own mental prisons. What I mean by mental prison is that many of us live lives which are comfortable. For example, we may live free, but internally we are shackled. And many times these shackles are mental and psychological and emotional. And what happens is these shackles are strengthened, or rather we actually sometimes create some of these shackles through habits that we've built over our lifetime sometimes, and we don't realize what we're doing. They're habits that we've gotten so used to, but what these habits do is they become self-sabotaging. We are actually keeping ourselves shackled mentally and psychologically through these habits. So what I want to do is just go through a few of these habits, a few of these very toxic behaviors, mental behaviors that we have that keep us inside of our own mental prison. The first one I want to talk about has to do with focus. So oftentimes we believe, so I'm going to talk about some myths, and then I'm going to leave you with a few statements. And I want you to take those statements, preferably write them down, and then I want you to reflect on them. So oftentimes what we believe is that we are a product of what happens to us, that our lives are simply a reaction to the events that happen in our lives. So something will happen, and we believe that we just react to that, or that we actually become victims of our own lives, victims to the things that happen to us in our lives. This is actually a myth, because only a very small portion of where we are has to do with what happened to us. The majority of it is how we reacted or how we responded to what happened to us. So there are three things in any given moment that determines where we end up being, where we end up going. There are three things in any given moment, anytime something happens, anytime we experience a challenge or we experience anything in life, there are three things that determine where we end up. The first is what we choose to focus on in that given moment. What we choose to focus on in that situation or in that experience. So for example, in any given moment, there will always be challenges and there will always be blessings, and they always come at the same time. This is one of the truths of Allah. This is one of the realities of this life. In fact, this is one of the realities of dunya, is that never is anything all bad and never is anything all good. That's just the way dunya is. Dunya is a combination of good and bad. Does everybody agree? I think most people agree that dunya is ups and downs, right? Yes? Okay. I'm going to actually sort of present a better analogy, what I think is a better analogy. And I read this somewhere. So we often believe that dunya, that our life is peaks and valleys, right? Sometimes we're high, sometimes we're low. And we go through life in these peaks and valleys. So what this writer said is, he gave a different analogy. He said, life is actually like a railroad track, where on one side, a railroad track, you have two sides and they're parallel and they're always next to each other, right? Then on one side, you have the good things in your life, the ease, the blessings. And on the other side, you have the challenges, and they're always right next to each other. See, the problem with the narrative of peaks and valleys, of highs and lows, is that many people start to think that we have all good or all bad, right? If I ask you about the best time in your life, the time when you were the happiest, and you go and you reflect about that time, was it perfect? Was there absolutely no challenges? Was nothing wrong? Did it become momentary Jannah? What's the answer? No, right? There was challenges at the same time. Similarly, and this is the thing we often forget, is that if I were to ask you about the hardest time in your life, about the biggest challenge that you faced in your life, I'm sure everyone can bring it up like that, right? We tend to think about this a lot. If you bring to mind the hardest time in your life, and then I ask you, during that time, you were going through all these challenges, right? Was there anything good in your life at that time? Was there any blessings? Was there any ease? And if you go back and reflect, you'll find that yes, in fact, there was. And there wasn't just one. It was plural. It was many. So the reality of dunya is that at every given moment, there is both good and bad. At every given moment, there is both yusr, ease, and if you're having usr, which is difficulty, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us what? Inna ma'al usri yusra. So at the same time that you're going through this difficult time, you're going through this challenge, you also have ease at the same time. Now this is where focus comes in. What do you choose to focus on in any given moment? Because there's both. We've decided as a group, yes? I should have talked about body language, but that's okay. Yes, okay. We decided as a group that life is like a railroad track, right? You have them both parallel. And so if you are in a situation where you're faced with a challenge, you're faced with a difficulty, you're faced with a hardship, at that same time, you're also being given ease and blessings. And so your choice is, which side of the railroad track am I going to focus on? And along with that point is another statement that I want you to take home with you. So these are like, I'm going to leave you with many statements that are going to be take-home messages for you to reflect on and hopefully remember. The next one is that what you focus on grows. So the things that you do choose to focus on will actually become more prominent in your life. And they will become more prominent in your mind. What does that translate to? Here's what it translates to. People who focus on problems will always see problems. People who focus on problems will always see problems. So what happens is, okay, you're a problem solver, right? A problem solver naturally focuses on problems. That's the double-edged sword. And so what happens is you'll focus on a problem and it's all you see. But once that problem has been resolved, what happens next? You find a new problem to focus on and it's all you see. So I don't need to tell you what happens in your life. You're always focused on a problem and it's all you see. And this isn't because your life is all problems. It's because that's what you chose to focus on. And what you focus on grows. And realize that that's a choice you have. That's a mental decision that you're making. Because Allah has given you both. You can't blame Allah. See, we focus on problems, they become so big, they surround us, and then we blame Allah. But Allah gave you both. Allah gave you, yes, you have a challenge, but you have a lot of blessings at the same time, but you're not focusing on them. You don't even see them. And so they become like nothing to you. And instead you're surrounded, and then you become paralyzed by your problems. And that is why? Because you took that one problem, you hyper-focused on it, and it grew. And it became all you see, and therefore it surrounds you, and then you become paralyzed by it.